we look at a classical example, the constitutions of the various countries of the West. Take the American Constitution, written by the most trusted minds and most enlightened minds of the 18th century. They sat down and wrote the Constitution for the United States of America. In it, in Article 1, Section 2, entitled the Three-Fifths Compromise, they state that black men were to be considered three-fifths of a white man. This is the Constitution of the United States of America, which is encased in glass in Washington. You can go to see it. People make pilgrimage to Washington to look at this document written by the founding fathers of America. This is what they wrote. Still there. They have not removed it. They have amended it. They're not working according to it today. They have amended it, but because that document has reached the status of revelation for them, they keep it exactly as it is. So you can go and read it. Of course, the mind of this time in America rejects it. It is unjust. It is unfair. It is making black Americans not quite human. Only three-fifths of a human being. But this is the product of human minds coming to the best that they can. Because human minds, when they come together to try to decide what is good, what is best, they always make decisions based on class interests, family interests, national interests, tribal interests. This is what happens. And this is why Islam is fundamentally opposed to this. This is the basic principle of democracy. Because Allah, who created human beings, is the only one who can enjoy laws which are not a part and parcel of interest, feelings or interests which are being produced. It is free of class, national, caste, etc. The second principle in democracy is that there must be a free arena for discussion and consent. Meaning, everybody, when they get together to make a decision, has to come there not believing that he or she has the absolute truth. There's no absolute truth. We come, we sit down, everybody throws out the idea which we all agree on, this now becomes the best. No absolute truth. Whereas again, from an Islamic perspective, there are absolute truths. The Sharia just presents absolute truth. Not this. Not the interpretation and application of Sharia. It's not absolute truth. But Sharia, revelation, the Qur'an and the Sunnah, this is absolute truth. So there's a fundamental difference here. What does this mean in practical terms? In practical terms, it means that the West has no solid foundation for morality in society. What was bad yesterday is good today. What is good today can be bad tomorrow. That is Western morality, in a constant state of upheaval, constantly changing. This is why, for example, when we consider the pressure being applied to the society, in Western society, Western civilization, by the homosexuals, and how that society has caved in, it is obvious that the society is incapable of establishing a solid basis for morality. 30 years ago, if the average American was asked, what is your view on homosexuality? He or she would answer, it is an abomination unto the Lord. This is it. This is from the Bible. But today, if you ask the average American, what do you think about homosexuality? He says it's a personal choice. It's a personal choice. People should be free to choose what they want to choose. How could it be that 30 years ago in the psychiatrist's Bible, psychiatrists have a book, a main book, the main book of psychiatry, in which they identify all of the ailments and illnesses. They refer to it as the psychiatrist's Bible. In it, homosexuality was identified as a mental illness, and they had prescribed treatments for it. Shock treatments, drug treatments, psychoanalysis, all kinds of things. But when that Bible was rewritten a decade ago, homosexuality was removed from the group of illnesses and it was replaced by another illness. What is this illness that they replaced it with? This illness is called homophobia. What is homophobia? Homophobia is the dislike of homosexuals. To hate a homosexual and his activities, to despise and to speak out against it, this is now classified as an illness, homophobia, and these are the people who now need to be treated by the psychiatrist. How can that be? How can that happen? It happens because the foundations of determining what is right and what is wrong morally in the society is not absolute truth, divine revelation, which cannot be changed, but human agreement. The basic principle which governs these kind of family affairs, and when I call it family affairs because now it is defined as family affairs. In America today, in the primary schools, in the major cities, they have books which are being taught, books for children, prepared especially for children, teaching about family affairs, and it's called My Two Dads. My Two Dads. This is real. Children at the age of 6 and 7 and 8 are being taught that you could have two dads, two moms, a mom and a dad, a mom or a dad. All of that is family. So they commonly don't even refer to issues of mom and dad anymore. They say parents. Single parent or parent. This state of affairs is the product of a line of reasoning which developed with regard to fornication and adultery. When they began to correct their legal system and remove fornication and adultery from the law book, they devised a principle. This principle was called consenting adults. This is the principle. Meaning, whatever takes place between consenting adults, the state has no right to interfere with. To try to interfere is to try to bring religion into family life. So they say the foundation is the principle of consenting adults. Two adults, whatever they agree to do between themselves, whether it be two males, two females, or a male and a female, then it is their right. Of course, they began with a male and a female. But eventually, because they opened that door, then 2 females and 2 males had the right to demand similar rights. So that opened up the door for them. And Sweden, in terms of the evolution of Western thought, and along this line, Sweden has taken this thought to the pinnacle. In Sweden, incest is removed from the law books as a crime. Meaning a man having relations with his mother, his sister, or his daughter, as long as they're adults, it is not a crime. And this is where democracy is headed. And Islam stands firm. Islam, the teachings of Islam stand firm against this thought, this way of thinking, this type of morality. This is why I said from the very beginning that only Islam stands in the wave of secular democracy. All of the other civilizations, Chinese civilization, when it became communist, it became a part and parcel of Western civilization. Because communism is secular democracy, the rule of the proletariat. That's the democracy, and it is secular. The communists were even rougher on Muslims than any other people. Religious people of all types, but Muslims in particular. Indian society, they became secular also. Only Islam has the necessary components for a civilization which can oppose Western domination, Western cultural domination, and the West recognizes it. The West recognizes it. This is why they focus their attacks on anywhere where Islam seems to be coming to the forefront. This is why when in Algeria it appeared that Muslims were going to come to rule that country through democratic means, through elected means, the FIS is about to win. When the military stepped in and canceled the election, the West was silent. They were silent. Why? When they're always talking about democracy, democracy. Why were they silent? Because it wasn't secular democracy. That's the point. Secularism is primary. This is the most important consideration. And democracy secondary. But the two together. And this is why the move in Turkey, the attitude of America towards Turkey, supporting that military dictatorship. Supports it. Why? Because they maintain secularism. And you found Bush when Russia fell apart, and the Russian state, and southern Russian states which were Muslims, broke off, started to set up their own systems. Bush pointed out, Carter pointed out, we hope that these states will follow the secular democratic example of Turkey. Stress. And their aid to these countries is in accordance with their willingness to commit themselves to these principles. So this is the reality of the struggle. But the question is, are Muslims in a position to meet the challenge? In the period of the Crusades, yes. Islamic civilization met the challenge, defeated the Crusaders, and established its hegemony over much of the world. People came to their senses of learning to gain knowledge in Cordoba, in Baghdad, but now the tables are turned. Muslims are not in that position. Politically, the countries are divided up. But he said there is this obsession with bringing Islam to the forefront. If Islam comes to the forefront and countries link up together again, then we have a clear situation of opposition to the domination of Western civilization. But the question still remains for Muslims in most parts of the world, whether they're in Muslim countries or they're in minority situations like here in Trinidad, are they up to the challenge? Even on the most fundamental of levels. The reality is that they're not. They're not because, for the most part, they have become subject to the principle of traditionalism. Traditionalism rules Muslim societies today, whether it be in countries, Pakistan, Egypt, or it be in minorities here, Guyana, elsewhere. Traditionalism rules the community. And traditionalism refers to the concept that we should blindly follow the traditions of our parents. Whatever our parents told us to do, whatever they did, this is what we should continue to do. You are not allowed to question. To question these traditions is considered some kind of deviation and heresy. This is why, if somebody who was enlightened to the foundations of Islamic civilization, which is in fact the Qur'an and the Sunnah, as it was understood by the early generation of Muslim scholars, righteous Muslims, the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, those after them, who carried on this tradition. If somebody were to bring to the common man on the street today an evidence from the Qur'an and the Sunnah to correct one of their practices, the response to that person will say is, this is not my tradition. This is not my custom. This is not what my parents were doing. And my parents couldn't have been wrong. This response has been documented in the Qur'an 1,400 years ago. Documented in 6 or 7 different verses of the Qur'an. In what context? An example of it is in Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 104. In which Allah says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ وَإِلَى الرَّسُولِ. If you, Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, tell the pagans, come to what Allah has revealed and to His Messenger, the Qur'an and Sunnah. قَالُوا حَسْبُنَا مَا وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهِ آبَاءَنَا. They will say, they will respond, what we found our foreparents doing is sufficient for us. What we found our foreparents doing is sufficient for us. Allah goes on to say, أَوَلَوْ كَانَ آبَاؤُهُمْ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ. Even though their foreparents didn't know anything, nor were they rightly guided. The question we should raise is, for those who say this is not our custom, this is not what our parents were doing, we ask, were your parents Sahaba? Were your parents present when the Quran was revealed? So, there have been many generations from that time. So can we trust what your parents were doing to be what in fact Prophet Muhammad brought and his companions maintained and handed down? No, we have no guarantee of that. That response is the traditionalist response, which Allah describes as the foundation of pagan thought. It is the resistance, the foundation for resistance to the truth. And when we look in Muslim society at the basis for the tradition, and there are many different traditions. Some of them are inherited traditions. In pre-Islamic times, people were doing it, people continue to do it now. Some of them are adopted traditions. Muslims, when they came in contact with other societies, they adopted their traditions. Some of them are based on innovations in the religion. mystical traditions where they introduce a new way of thinking, a new way of practice of the religion. Or some of them are factionalists. They're based on factions, different groupings, etc., which set up in the society, and people vying with each other. Now, some of these issues we may consider, especially if we go back and look at the issues of adopted and inherited practices. We may look at them as being minor. Why do we have to make an issue about it? Well, I would say that I'll give you some examples. When Prophet Muhammad said, "Man ahdatha fi amrina ma laysa minhu fahuwa radd," whoever brings something new in this religion which is not a part of it, it is rejected. He said that because innovation in the religion is evil. As he said, it is dalala, misguidance. And it is harmful. This is why it has been prohibited. This is what led Christianity from the Islam which Prophet Isa alayhi salam brought. It evolved from Islam into Christianity, another religion. This change took place by way of innovation. People came into the teachings and brought with them their traditions from Rome and from Greece, etc., etc. I will take a couple of issues just to show you the harm that can come out of these practices. We know in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, in this area, the custom is among Muslims that when their daughters are getting married, mahar is given to the proposed husband. Right. We know in Islam the mahar is given by the male to the female to show his readiness, preparedness to look after the female. But in those societies, the common practice, not in every place, but in most places, is that the family of the female gives wealth, money to the male to marry. Now, this is Hindu tradition. It is Christian tradition also. But particularly there is Hindu tradition. The Hindus do exactly the same thing. Now, what is the result of this tradition in modern times among the Hindus? That when the husband, after being promised all these things by the family of his wife, he doesn't receive these things. So something happens to the family is not able to give the necessary wealth or whatever. He's upset. He demands it. She can't bring it. He gets greedy. Sometimes she brought it, but he wants more. Tell your parents to give me some more money. I want a new car or whatever. She can't do it. What does he do? He conspires with his mother. And they pour gasoline over the wife and they set her on fire. These are called bride burning. Hundreds, literally hundreds of Hindu women are burnt alive every year because of this principle of dowry. And many mother-in-laws, they talk about how many, articles talk about how many of them are in jail for this. Now we can see the obvious evil of it. Now Muslims who have adopted this tradition, we would say this couldn't happen to a Muslim. However, there was an article in the Gulf News, because I'm living in the Middle East, right? I took it from the Gulf News newspaper. February this year, the title of the article was "Woman Burned to Death, Dhaka." In Dhaka. A greedy husband burned to death his young wife at Tikpara in the city following a feud over dowry, the police said. When I first started to read it, I said, oh, here comes another Hindu burning his wife. But then it went on to say, they said that Zahir Mia. I was shocked. Zahir Mia poured kerosene over the body of his wife Shahnaz 20 years old and set her on fire on Sunday. She died in the Dhaka Medical Hospital yesterday. So we see the harm that can come from these kind of practices. This is bodily harm. There is religious harm which comes from this belief. I have been addressed by many from that area about when a man is responsible to make Hajj. They asked me, if a man's daughter is not married, isn't he excused from making Hajj? The common belief. As I mentioned, let's finish this point because the Adhan is going to come. Will they pray the Salah immediately after the Adhan? Immediately after. So we'll continue after the Salah. The question that is asked, as I said, is a man whose daughter is not married responsible to make Hajj? If he doesn't have the money he has, they believe the money he has should be used to ensure that his daughter gets married. So if he hasn't got his daughter married, he's not obliged to make Hajj. So that now, this requirement, which in Islam, according to Islamic teachings, if a man has the means, economic means to make Hajj, it's compulsory on him. They are now cancelling the compulsory nature of Hajj because he hasn't got his daughter married. This is religious harm. Because Prophet ﷺ said, one who has the means to make Hajj and does not make Hajj, delays the Hajj, it makes no difference to Allah whether he dies a Christian or a Zoroastrian. So this is serious. This is a serious area in which the religion of the individual, or even the social life of the individual can be harmed, where traditions are not corrected. Another example, leaving the Indian subcontinent over to Africa. There was an article in June of this year, heading of the article, "Son held for killing mother" in Qina, Egypt. Okay, I knew there are about 20 million Christian Egyptians. Out of the 60-odd million Egyptians, 20 million are little Christians. So I figured I saw the son held killing mother. A 22-year-old son beheaded and dismembered his widowed mother when he found out that she had secretly remarried, breaking with tradition in southern Egypt. Police here said yesterday. When I read that, I said, oh, probably some Christian, traditions, they're killing their mothers over these things. But here, in June, began son held for killing mother in Qina, Egypt. A 22-year-old son beheaded and dismembered his widowed mother when he found out that she had secretly remarried, breaking with tradition in southern Egypt, police here said yesterday. And as I said, when I first read this article, knowing that there is a large Christian population in Egypt, I assumed that it was one of the Christians involved in this kind of activity. But to my surprise, the article went on to say, Salah Ahmed Hassan, helped by one of his uncles, forced Samira Salam, 35 years old, into the village cemetery in Naqada, a hamlet north of the southern resort of Luxor, where they strangled, beheaded, and dismembered the woman, the police said. They said the woman was pregnant. Hassan and Samira's brother were detained for questioning, and they admitted their crimes. This woman, Samira, was murdered by her son and her brother. Why? Because she broke with the tradition. What was this tradition? The tradition in southern Egypt was based on a myth, an ancient Egyptian myth from the time of the pharaohs, where the goddess Isis, they had this goddess they believed in, the goddess Isis, her brother Seth, desired her. So he killed her husband Osiris in order to get her as his wife. But Isis refused to marry him and instead raised her son Horus. Horus is the eagle or falcon symbol in Egyptian mythology. She raised her son Horus. When he got old enough, then he avenged the death of his father and killed Seth. This legend, the cult of the worship of Isis, began in southern Egypt and it spread to the rest of Egypt. This was the home ground for this particular belief. And that belief, that is from ancient times, thousands and thousands of years ago, remains embedded in the present day practice of Muslims in southern Egypt. So that a woman, if she becomes widowed, it is forbidden for her to remarry. So much so that we have this article of a son and a woman's brother cooperating to murder, dismember, cut her to pieces in a cemetery. These are just a couple of examples of how customs can lead to harm, where these customs are against Islamic teaching. Because, of course, Prophet Muhammad married widows. Some of his wives, Salama, was a widow. So it is totally against Islamic principles. And the example from Dhaka, Prophet Muhammad gave mahar to his wife. Their families didn't give him anything. This is not the way of Islam. So once Muslims adopt or maintain these customs, which are from pagan times or pagan cultural practices, which are against Islamic teachings, then they will harm that society. Now, Islam doesn't oppose every single custom. There is a place in Islamic law referred to as urf, which deals with customs. But these are the customs which do not conflict with Islamic principles and values. Those customs do identify people and their cultures in different parts of the world. Islam is not opposed to them, as long as they do not conflict with Islamic values. The other two areas of traditionalism is one, the branch of mysticism which evolved in the Muslim world, in which it was promoted that the human soul was divine and that it could link with God. Names were given to it. Names like Fana, Ittihad, Arabic names were given. But the essential concept is pagan. It is a concept found in the ancient Greeks. Plato, in his Symposium, spoke about it. The Hindus have the same belief in nirvana, moksha actually of the Hindus, nirvana of the Buddhists. Same concept of the soul, human soul, uniting with the divine soul. Now, this in and of itself is innovation in the religion, in religious thought. But the greatest evil which came out of such beliefs is intermediacy, where people encourage Muslims to pray to others besides Allah, where intermediaries were set up between man and Allah. The fundamental teachings of Islam is that human beings can address Allah directly. Ud'uni astajib lakum, as Allah says, call on me and I will answer your prayer. He didn't say call on so-and-so or call on my awliya or my anybody and I will answer your prayer. He said call on me. And Prophet had said, Ad-du'a huwa al-ibadah. Dua, when you raise your hands and you call, this is call out, supplicate to God, this is worship. Whoever you are calling on, you are worshipping. It doesn't matter about the philosophical rationale that you may give to it. Hindu philosophers, if you ask them about worshipping their idol, they will tell you, we're not worshipping this actual idol you see in front of us. We are worshipping God through this idol. Don't we go through these motions with the idol, the puja, and all we do these things we do? Really, this is not for the physical idol. We made it, we know. This is a way of worshipping God. So, philosophically, they have rationalized their actions. But the fact of the matter is, they are idolaters. That is the fact of the matter. Christians, if you ask them, you're worshipping a man, Jesus. They say, no. We're not worshipping Jesus the man. We're worshipping Jesus who was God as a man. This is the rationale. There is a rationale behind it. So they argue, no, we're worshipping God. God became a man. So we're not worshipping the human aspect of Jesus. We're worshipping the divine that was Jesus. But the fact of the matter is, they're worshipping a man. And it's idolatry. Similarly, those who say, you, brother, are sinful. Your iman is dirty. How can you raise your hand and expect God to answer your prayers? No, you should pray to somebody who is pure, who did not live the kind of life you have lived, who is closer to God, closer to Allah. You pray through this person, and your prayers will be answered by Allah. The reality, yes, this is a rationale. It's a line of reasoning. And when they give this reasoning, they will say, well, it's just the same way. If you want to see the president of Trinidad and Tobago, you can't just go marching down to his office and bang on his door and come walking in to talk to him. No. You have to go and see some other people who are in positions of authority, and they will, work your message through to the president. Same thing. The reality is that when they do that, they make Allah like human beings. They make Allah like human beings. No, Allah is beyond that. That is in our human affairs, yes, we need intermediaries to get to people of authority, etc. But Allah knows. Because if we're going to use this line of argument, then we have to accept the argument of the Christians when they say, when explaining why God is three in one, that God, like an egg, they have the egg theory. The egg, it has a shell. It has a white, it has a yolk. It's these three parts that make the egg. But it's one egg. But we say, that's an egg. That's not Allah. That's not God, that's an egg. You have made God like an egg, like His creation. We don't accept that. Or they like to put out the tree theory. The tree theory, what's the tree theory? God is like a tree. The tree has branches, it has a trunk, and it has roots. But it's one tree. We say, that's the tree, that's not God. God is not made up of parts and pieces. This is His creation that is made up of parts and pieces. When you try to make Allah like that, then you're making Him like His creation. In the same way, when those who want to argue that we need to go through somebody to go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have made Him like His creation. And this is the greatest evil that came out of that movement. Now there are people within that movement who were righteous people. People like Abu Qadir al-Jilani, who was a known scholar, Hanbali scholar of his own time, a righteous man. But after his death, people changed his biography. They made up stories about him, elevating him from the status of the normal human being. So you can now read books which describe Sheikh Abdul Qadir as when he was born in Ramadan. And what did he do as a baby? Born in Ramadan. He didn't used to drink milk from his mother's breast during the daylight hours of Ramadan. After sunset, then he would start to drink. We don't have this recorded of Prophet Muhammad or the Sahaba. But we're going to have this recorded about somebody else. So, he, unfortunately, with these other stories that were built up, but this is only the beginning, the tip of the iceberg. If you wanted to read all the stories that were attributed to Abdul Qadir, in the end, Abdul Qadir became an intermediary. He was given the title Ghawsi Azam, Al-Ghaws Al-A'zam, the greatest source of help. So people in times of difficulty, calamity, they would, instead of calling out, Ya Allah, oh Allah help me, they would say, Ya Abdul Qadir, help me. This is the greatest evil which came out of that movement. The last source of tradition, is factionalism. And the factionalism initially became evident in what came to be known as the schools of Islamic law, the madhab. Now the scholars of that early generation of scholars who rose to the occasion of educating the ummah, whose students studied under them and studied under various scholars, they did not intend to lay down a particular school which was to be followed exclusively. This was not their intention. They did not formulate this. They were scholars, people gathered around them, learned from them. Those who studied under them, accepted the principles which they developed, etc., became known as students of the scholars. And that became like a school of thought, referred to as the madhab. The scholars themselves studied under each other. Imam Shafi'i, he went as a young teenager from Gaza in Egypt, and in Palestine, he went to Medina to study under Imam Malik. And he studied there for more than 20 years until Imam Malik died. After studying under Imam Malik, he went to Yemen. From there, he went to Iraq, and he studied there under the students of Abu Hanifa. Abu Hanifa was already dead. He studied under his students, Muhammad al-Shaybani, Abu Yusuf. And after that, he wrote a book of 6 principles which he called Al-Hujjah. Then he went to Egypt to study under Imam al-Layth, but Imam al-Layth died by the time he reached Egypt. So he studied under the students of Imam al-Layth. Al-Layth ibn Sa'd. Al-Layth was a contemporary of Imam Malik. And after studying under the students of Imam al-Layth, he said, Al-Laythu afqahu min Malik. Imam al-Layth was a greater jurist than Imam Malik. Now, if we were to say this, some people would say, oh, this is prejudicial. Who are you to judge the Imam? But now this is a student of the Imam. He can make that judgment. And he said, Al-Laythu afqahu min Malik. Layth was a greater jurist than Malik, but his students caused his school of thought to be lost. He had weak students. Imam Malik had strong students who were intellectually gifted, and they carried on his line of reasoning and train of thought, etc. All of which was interpretation of the Sharia, applying it for people. Still, Qur'an and Sunnah. Imam Shafi'i stayed in Egypt, and his school of thought became the school for Egypt and spread from Egypt. And he wrote a new book called Al-Umm. And in his book Al-Umm, he changed many of the rulings that he had put in his book Al-Hujjah. He didn't have any problem with it. And their students. Imam Ahmad was a student of Imam Shafi'i, and so on. They studied under each other, their students studied under each other's students. Muhammad al-Shaybani, one of the leading students of Abu Hanifa, he is one of the narrators of the Muwatta of Malik. He studied under Imam Malik and memorized Imam Malik's book of Hadith. He's one of the narrators. This was the tradition of the righteous forefathers of the Ummah, known in Arabic as the Salaf. And they studied under each other, they studied under, most of the time, on some scholars, and they would take rulings from other scholars. They changed rulings when evidence came to them. This was the tradition. And this was what was carried on for generations by other scholars. However, a time came when, due to a variety of factors, rigidity set in. The schools became reduced to 3.5. Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, and Hanbali. Hanbali was like half. Just a few followers decreasing. And the attitude developed that these schools were to be followed by each person as a compulsory and obligation on each Muslim. Even they made rulings, this is after the 13th century, after the fall of Baghdad, that those people who switch from one school to another should be laxed. Rulings were made that if you are one school, you can't marry women from another school. Rulings like this were made. And in masjids built during that period, they would put 2 mihrabs. At that time, the most common 2 schools were the Shafi'i and Malik and Hanafi. So they would have 2 mihrabs, 2 places for the imams to stand. When the time for prayer came, the Shafi'i imam would lead his Shafi'i people. When they're finished, then the Hanafi would stand up and the Hanafi would pray. Around the Kaaba, you see pictures of the Kaaba from the late 1800s, early 1900s. You will see structures around the Kaaba which they identify Maqam Hanafi, Maqam Shafi'i, Maqam Hanbali, Maqam Maliki. And Maqam meaning the place of standing, the place to stand. The Imam used to stand there. He would lead prayer. And you had 4 different prayers going on around the Kaaba. Of course, this is not from Islam. Islam never taught this. People, due to their short-sightedness and rigidity, created this situation. Alhamdulillah, since that time, there has been change. The attitude, the rigid attitudes of that period of some 200, 300, 400 years has decreased. Now people now are more able to pray behind each other, this kind of thing. Alhamdulillah, due to the work and the effort of many of the Muslim movements that are involved in conveying Islam to lots of the people, from one level to another, from the Ikhwan to the Jamaat Tabligh, to Jamaat Islam, and the various movements which arose saw the weakness and the harm of this type of attitude and encouraged the followers to break down those barriers. Scholars like Shah Waliullah Dahlawi, he was among those who promoted the idea of reunifying the madhab, not having these differences, studying hadith more, etc., etc. So to some degree, that decreased. However, it still remains in a number of communities, very rigid attitudes towards schools of Islamic thought. The reality, as I said, is that these schools are not religious in and of themselves. They are a means by which the scholars of the past sought to interpret the Sharia and help us to apply it in our lives. And they were human beings, meaning that the rulings of all of these schools are not perfect. As a whole, they encompass the deen. But as an individual, we cannot say this person or this individual, this school encompasses the deen. It is an attempt to apply. But as Muslims, we need to be able to draw from all of the sources. A person may study under one school because that is what's available, that is the institution he went to, they taught one school. But he doesn't become a blind follower. This is what Islam, in my view, does not uphold. The idea of blindly following any human being except Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is the one who we should follow blindly. He said this, he did that, we follow him. Whether we understand it in the end or we don't understand it, we follow him. But anybody else, any other human being, we have to recognize that they are capable of error. Therefore, we do not follow them blindly. We may trust them, we recognize them as righteous scholars, etc., etc., and we will follow them, take rulings, etc., from them, but not blindly, meaning if somebody comes and brings us evidence which is comprehensible to us, which indicates different from what we have understood, then we do not have a reluctance to accept the new evidence that comes to us. This was the way of the early scholars and their students, and this should be the mentality of Muslims, so that this factionalism does not break the ranks of Muslims. Now, in more recent times, factionalism has spread into movements, where we have different movements have evolved in the 20th century for promoting Islam, that these movements, in a sense, or to some degree, have become like factions, where the members tend to look at others who are not members as being them, us and them. And this kind of mentality is again dangerous. It is harmful. Because the efforts of human beings to try to apply is always fraught with mistakes. And Prophet ﷺ said, كُلُّ بَنِي آدَمْ خَطَّاءٌ وَخَيْرُ الْخَطَّائِينَ التَّوَّابُونَ. All of Adam's descendants commit errors, mistakes, and the best of those who commit mistakes are those who constantly turn to Allah in repentance. So we should not look at any of the movements as being infallible, incapable of any error. So if someone advises us, well, listen, this part of your movement, it needs correction, it's not quite right, say, no, we cannot break away. We have now become traditionalists. We are so linked and keyed on to this thing, we cannot change it. It's become fixed. But wait, that is Sharia. Sharia is fixed and cannot be changed. Anything else that we make, any interpretation that we make, this can be changed. That is where the flexibility of the Sharia of Islam lies. There is a fixed aspect The Qur'an and the Sunnah is unchangeable. But the fiqh, the understanding, interpretation, and application, this is changeable. This is why there should not be a problem for us if somebody tells us, listen, smoking cigarettes is haram. Yeah, Muslims will tell us, no, it's makruh, it's makruh, it's makruh. We know it's makruh. Yes, there was a ruling that it was makruh 500 years ago. When tobacco first came into the Muslim world, into the Ottoman Empire, and actually the Turks invented the rolled cigarette because it came as pipe. The cigarette we smoke today now was invented by the Turks. Turkish Muslims. The scholars at the time, they analyzed this because everything in Islam is placed into a category. The moral foundation of Islam. Either it is something compulsory, something recommended, something neutral, something disliked, or something forbidden. So they said, how is it to do this thing? They looked at the effects of smoking. What did it cause? What is the harm that came from smoking? Was there harm? They said, yes, there is harm. It causes bad breath. This is why Western civilization spends so much money. You've got all these sprays, people, can buy to cover the smoker's breath. Horrible. Person who's been smoking for many years, even toothpaste can't remove it. So they have special sprays to cloud it. They looked at this, okay, this is the effect, and they said, let's go into Sharia. What is in Sharia dealing with things which cause bad breath? They found from Prophet and said, whoever eats onions, raw onions and garlic, don't come to our masjid. Why? Because of course in our salah, we pray very close to each other, we turn at the end of salah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Garlic, onion, okay, this makes life very difficult. So Prophet said to protect the ummah from the harm, he said, pray in your home. Now, the point is that prayer in the masjid is 25 to 27 times greater than prayer in the home. So anything which would deprive you of the additional benefits, we have to look at it as being makruh, disliked. So that ruling they said, which we apply to raw onions and garlic, we apply it now to smoking. But 1979, 500 years later, Western medicine stated, with the statement of the Surgeon General of the United States of America, it is conclusively proven that smoking causes cancer. Got a new set of information now. It's not just bad breath, this thing causes cancer. And they have been struggling for some 30 years. Companies, which are the cigarette companies, they have their own doctors doing their own research trying to cover it up. The other doctors saying, yeah, it causes, no, it's not clear evidence. They've been fighting. Cigarette companies have been fighting right up to that point. But when the evidence became so overwhelming that they couldn't resist anymore, they had to submit. So they had to write on their packages, danger of the health, causes cancer, all these different statements. They're not doing it out of concern for the health of people. They're doing it because they're forced. So, scholars of this time rightly changed the ruling. Number of scholars of this time rightly changed the ruling from makruh to haram. Because this thing now causes cancer causes death. Anything which causes death, known to cause death, is haram for you to take it. Known to harm you, is haram for you to take it. So the ruling changed. And this is fiqh. This is fiqh. This is the body of Islamic ruling, which can vary from time to place to circumstance. And this is how we have to look at the rulings of the scholars. Because what happens is that you may have two rulings of scholars on an issue. Both of them supported by evidence from the Qur'an and from the Sunnah. What do you do now? what you do is you take the ruling which is most applicable to your circumstance. You take that ruling and you apply it. This is acceptable. This is not the same as what is known as fatwa shopping. I spoke about this before, fatwa shopping, where somebody goes looking for a fatwa. They have something they want to do, so they go asking scholars. Everywhere they go, they're asking scholars because they want to do this thing. Everybody keeps telling them, no, haram, haram because of the Qur'an, haram because of Sunnah, so. And they keep asking. So every time they hear that, they still keep asking. Till they finally found somebody who says, okay. And they say, mashallah, and they go and do it. Because they had the plan to do it in the first place. This is not acceptable. This is fatwa shopping, where a person is not seeking the truth, seeking what is better. They're seeking what is convenient to their own desires. So Muslims in our time, where those who seek to follow the Qur'an and Sunnah, follow it through scholars who are trained from the different schools, or from scholars who did not specifically follow a particular school, but followed all of the schools together. We have to judge the rulings which come to us in the same light. Because even amongst those who have said, for example, taken a position, okay, we're not going to follow school, we're going to follow a scholar who doesn't follow a particular school. But what happens is that whenever that scholar makes a ruling, people now say, okay, that's it. That's it. If somebody from a school brings an evidence to the contrary, they say, no, we heard from the scholar. This is our scholar, Sheikh so-and-so. So they have become, in their own way, blind followers. And somebody has the right, who follows the school, to say, well, listen, if Sheikh so-and-so is a greater scholar than Abu Hanifa, no, you so if I'm going to blindly follow, I'll blindly follow Abu Hanifa. That's the right argument. The point is that we have to keep an open mind and understand that the differences which are in fiqh, these differences should not create barriers in Islamic communities and Islamic work. We have to try to resolve them. Where these differences are resolvable, because to the question of evidence lacking and evidence present, we can resolve it and carry on. But where it becomes the issue of ijtihad, some scholars have evidence for one thing, some scholars have evidence for another thing. And after we look at the evidence, some people say, no, I prefer to go with this one, it seems to be more accurate to me, others say I prefer to go with this one. Then we have to be prepared to say, MashaAllah, you do your thing, I do my thing, let's keep on working together. Because what we're following is not desire. We're following evidence. So where Muslims are following practices which are based on authentic evidence from the deen, then we have to be prepared to accept their right to choose that path and to continue to work together to build our communities here. We should not allow those kind of differences to split. Of course, where you have differences which have to do with the foundations of our belief. The Qadianis, for example, who now say that there was a prophet after Muhammad ﷺ. This is attacking the very foundations of our belief. So those kind of differences, we cannot accept. We cannot work with those people. Those people are outside of the pale of Islam. But as long as people are within the main boundaries of Islam, not breaking fundamental principles of faith and practice. You have, for example, the Parvezis now in Pakistan, a movement which is gaining weight in Pakistan, which calls for the Qur'an alone. Forget the Sunnah. Leave aside the Sunnah. We're only following the Qur'an. This is a movement which has deviated, has gone outside of the pale, it is destroying the deen. Such movements, such beliefs, we have to stand firm against. But where everybody else is within the basic beliefs, basic practices, then we have to recognize that there will be differences and be able to continue to work together. And then, from the movements, we have in modern times organizations. And how many are the organizations? It's one of the things plaguing our communities today. Everybody wants to be a president, or at least a treasurer. So we have no end of presidents and treasurers. As soon as people disagree in an organization, one says, okay, I'm going to form my own organization. I'll be a president. This is sickness. This is sickness. This is a lack of ikhlas, a lack of sincerity. As Allah tells us, وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. You are only commanded to worship Allah, keeping the religion sincere for Him. This is what is acceptable to Allah. An organization which is set up in order to serve Islam, to serve Muslims, to apply Islam. This is acceptable. But an organization for the sake of an organization, so that I can be a president, and my brother can be a treasurer, and my cousin can be the secretary, this is not acceptable to Allah. Be sure that such an organization is cursed by Allah. And this is what is plaguing Muslims today. We have to come together. We have to bring the organizations together, not necessarily to form one organization. If that happens, mashallah. But that's not absolutely necessary. The necessary point is that our organizations can work together. The functions that we have, Muslims can feel free to go from one function to another. They shouldn't feel inside themselves, oh, I don't want people to see me because I don't belong to this Jamaat or whatever. Feeling this kind of fear. So they won't go to listen to a lecture or whatever because it is not from his Jamaat. This is harmful. These become barriers in the way of knowledge, barriers in the way of community. And Allah stresses to us, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا. Hold on firmly, all of you, to the rope of Allah. This is where success lies. This was the way of the Sahaba. They held on firmly. Though they had differences among themselves. There were differences. But they sought to keep that community together. And this is what we need today. We need to address problems of knowledge and which is lacking in the community today. Lacking to such a degree that the majority of our masjids are empty. Salatul Fajr, we go there, there is nobody. This is a problem. How can the community be blessed by Allah when the first pillar of action of Islam after the Shahadatan, the first pillar of action, Salah, about this Prophet said, the first thing that we will be asked about on the day of judgment is Salah. First Salah, 5 times daily Salah. How can we imagine that the blessings of Allah will be on our community and we are unable to establish this fundamental principle, Salah, Salatul Fajr in the masjid? We have wonderful organizations, we build beautiful masjids, many associations, presidents, secretaries, etc. But our masjids are empty. We have to get back to our priorities. Education of our children, education of ourselves, so that we can fear Allah, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. That those who truly fear Allah are the knowledgeable ones from His servants. Knowledge is powerful. طلب العلم فريضة على كل Muslim. Seeking knowledge is compulsory for every Muslim. Why? Because that knowledge, combined with acting on that knowledge, builds in the individual iman, true faith. So we need to set up, again, in our masjid system, whether it be maktab, makatib, where the children who are coming to the masjid are being taught fundamental teachings of Islam, from Arabic, from fiqh, etc. Or Islamic schools functioning as Islamic schools, not schools of Muslims. Schools of Muslims where you have Muslim children in a school, maybe many of the teachers are Muslim, but what is being taught there is still the same as what is being taught in the secular school. The child is a Muslim, but only in name. It is a Muslim school, but only in name. The spirit of Islam is not there. So the graduates of such institutions will not be torchbearers for Islam. If they happen, it is by the mercy of Allah. But those schools, those institutions, are not geared towards producing committed Muslims who understand that the knowledge is from Allah and they have a duty to use that knowledge for the benefit of themselves and the community, not just to promote themselves economically, socially in the society. They have a responsibility to the community. In closing, I would just like to remind us of the key issues here. There is an international problem which exists. One which is referred to as the clash of civilization. Western civilization, its core beliefs are in contrast, are in conflict with the ideals, the fundamental beliefs of Islamic civilization. And the West is bent on imposing its civilization throughout the world. And it focuses on Islam and Muslims because they represent the last frontier. They represent the last frontier, the last barrier. This is why the feminists, for example, were involved in the food and health and organizations from the UN when they went into Afghanistan. They went there to liberate, as they saw it, the Muslim women. And they came in direct conflict with the Taliban. The Taliban were not about oppressing the women, but this is how they approached it. Taliban don't want education for the women, they're oppressing the women. Because their idea is that the woman was to be liberated, meaning she doesn't have to wear any kind of garments, she can be out half naked, she has the same ideas as the Western civilization. So the Taliban would say, no, we have to have Sharia. Sharia, the laws of Islam have to govern the way that people interact socially, how they dress, etc., etc. So they closed down those schools that involve mixing and corruption, and said, okay, not that we're going to deny women education, but we need to reorganize this thing so that women may be educated on the proper circumstances. But for the West, for the feminists who were involved in this process, this wasn't a fuss. They raised Cain left and right. And they tried to make the image of the Taliban as evil as possible. The mad mullahs of Afghanistan. And this is the way that they, in the press, they try to demonize Muslim activities. Sudan became a terrorist state because they dared to apply Sharia in spite of the reservations of the West, when they told them no, don't apply it, they went ahead and applied it. So they tried to bring Sudan to its knees economically. Economic blockade, which has been going on for over a decade. And this is how they will operate in the Muslim world. So this is what we need to understand internationally. But locally, we recognize, as well as nationally, that Muslims, for the most part, are not rising to the challenge. Because they have become locked into inherited customs and traditions which are not, for the most part, from Islamic origin. Muslims are now incapable of determining where Islam begins and where customs end. It's all so mixed up together that, a person, if they're shown something, please, brother, Qur'an says this, Hadith says this, the person will say, I'm a Maliki. Actually, if you go into Maliki Madhab, you will find that the Maliki Madhab doesn't even hold this opinion. But it's the common practice and opinion in that area, so the people assume that it is Maliki. This is the blind adherence to custom that we need to change. We need to question. The beginning of knowledge lies with faith, followed by question. We need to question, what is the origin of these things? If it's really not a part of Islam, it's not from Islamic teachings, then we need to set it aside and take the Islamic teachings and use that as the foundation of our civilization, the foundation of our communities and our society. And we said in closing that it is essential for us to reunite the ranks of Muslims by overcoming the differences, the factionalist differences which have emerged amongst us. Some of them are historical, some of them are modern creations. We need to purify our intentions. Are we about Islam for the sake of Allah, or are we about our organization? Do we invite people to Islam, or do we invite them to our organization? This is the priority that we have to put in the correct context. And we said that we also need to look at the fundamentals of the deen again. We need to look at Salah, which is the foundation, and re-establish this in our masjid if we want to make change. Change is not going to come about through organizations and people are not making Salah in the masjid. The organizations will write beautiful charters, they'll make all kinds of agreements, this type of thing, but without the foundation of Salah in the masjid, it is hollow. And we also need an effort, whatever efforts we can make to unify the leadership of our communities, whether it is through councils of scholars, those who are been trained in different parts of the world. We need some kind of cohesiveness in dealing with the issues of the community, and the scholars should be in the forefront. Organizations have become in the forefront and their presidents, but really, the scholars should be in the forefront, because they are the people who have the knowledge to be able to discern the right and wrong. They are, as Prophet ﷺ said, Warathatul Anbiya. They are the inheritors of the prophets. So we need to reorganize the structures of our community in such a way that the barriers that we have are broken. We still have organizations, but we don't fail to work together. We don't look at people who are not a part of our organization as them, and they're the us, but as Muslims. As Allah said, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. Indeed, the believers are only one brotherhood. Let's bring back that brotherhood. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.